And today's plan is around just what we've been talking about. So it's around a little bit around equality, diversity and inclusion, but through a TED lens. So thinking about it from a team perspective, how can teams create inclusive team environments? And perhaps sometimes how can you broach the perhaps tricky conversations or maybe address the elephant in the room? What sorts of things can teams do to create that sort of curious nature in a safe and inclusive way that brings everybody into the conversation. As always, we'll kick off a little bit with some information sharing and updates. So we've got some new toolkits to show you, and with some ideas for the website that I'd like to run past you as well. And then the second half of today's session, we're going to be looking a bit about the future of team engagement. So there's, as always, I think there's a lot of change going on in the NHS. There are plans for the future. I'm sure your organisations will have plans and maybe change that's happening that's specific to your organisations. But I thought it'd be a really good opportunity to talk about what that means for our teams and what teams might look like in maybe 5 or 10 years time, and how can team conversations support those changes that teams might go through in the journey to where they will be in that future. So we'll have a bit of a chat about that in the second half today. And as always, we'll cap off with future events. We've got some great ideas for lunch and learns and future deep dives on the horizon. For some of you who may be new, I think there are some new names and faces. Welcome if this is your first collaborative session. To remind those of you who've maybe been here for quite some time, when we first created our TED Collaborative, when we had our first trust get on board, we co-created our sort of ethos for this collaborative group, and the idea was that we be present and curious, we participate and share, we listen actively and respect each other's views, and we're creative and solution focused. And I think thinking back to what we've been talking around in terms of inclusion, that sort of sums up what we want our teams to do as well. And I guess as a collaborative community that we're creating here, we are in essence a team in the way that we work to try and support each other, try and help TED sort of evolve to the needs of our teams and our organisations. So I always love these sessions, that they're a great opportunity to sort of pool our knowledge and resources that we've got across the community. So first topic then is around information and updates. So if you go on to the TED website, we have some brand new toolkit resources really linked to today's first topic. So we've got 4 specific new ones. There are some already on there that align with this topic, so I'll share those in a moment. So we've got one around inclusive team check-ins, we've got a team belonging canvas, inclusive team habits audit, and a resource called Walking in My Shoes around, getting teams to think about different situations which their team members maybe or other members of their organisation might go through. So just to showcase those to you, I'm going to share my screen with you now. Hopefully everyone can see that. Has that come through? Yep, getting a few nods. Fab. So when you log into TED, if you come up to TED Toolkit at the top, you can see our toolkit resources, and you might notice those 4 new ones are on here. So by default, it will organise them by upload date. So you'll see our most recent toolkits up there. So we've got 4 new ones, and I'll go through them one by one. So our first one is called the Inclusive Team Check-in. So the intention with this is that we, I guess, get a bit of a temperature check for how inclusive our team is. And really, it's a very simple sort of audit around some of the key sort of areas that might make someone feel included or not included as well in the team. So the intention here is that it's a simple sort of table matrix, and the idea is, if I was running this in a classroom session, I might draw this table up on a whiteboard or bring it up on the screen, and I'd maybe get people to rank each of the questions, put a number on a post-it, collect those in and pop them up on the screen. You could do this virtually, of course, if you're a virtual type of team, and it has a tip around, you might want to use MS Forms or Mentimeter to create something similar. But the idea is it's a very simple way to get that temperature check of which of these elements do we do well as a team, and which things could we maybe improve? Is there room for improvement? And I think the intention when I created this one was something which could complement what you already get through TED. So some of these questions are similar to what we get in TED, but the idea is this focuses in on inclusive practices in our team and how people are feeling. What this one also does, step 2, is then around the discussion that happens on the back of that. So the idea is you can look at your TED results, you can look at the scores to this activity, and a team leader might want to ask questions around what helps us feel included, what are the things we do which make us feel included, when do people feel less included, so are there parts of our job role that make it difficult to feel part of the team, are there elements where we have to work in silos just because of the nature of the work that we do. And I think sometimes acknowledging those things can be an important step towards getting to where you want to be, because it's not always possible to do everything as a group, and it's about deciding what's right for us and the way that we work, and I guess our service users as well for the team that we're in. Next one asks, are some voices heard more than others? So you might be unpacking, are there stronger voices in our group? Are there things we can do to make sure that every voice is heard? In a lot of cases, TED itself might be one of the solutions to that. So if a team's doing TED for the first time, this might be where they're strengthening that commitment to do TED again in the future. Question around behaviours help us create belonging. So what behaviours perhaps help this? What behaviours maybe hinder this? Like with a lot of our TED resources, it's about calling out the behaviour rather than pointing the finger at individuals. It's about taking shared ownership and acknowledging where we get it right and where we perhaps get it wrong at times as well. And then final question there, what would improve inclusion in our team? So just asking the team, what opportunities are there? Is there something maybe different we could do about our team meetings? Is it about the frequency that we meet up? Is it about when we meet in person and maybe where we meet in person? How can we get that right in a way that fits with the way that we work? And as is often the case in TED, I think the answers to these questions might be different for every single team, because it will depend on the type of team you are, the types of personalities that you've got in your team, your types of different types of experiences that people are bringing to the team as well. So the idea is that teams figure out what's right for them and where that balance fits right. And then on page 2, it leads teams towards creating some shared commitments. So the idea with this might be something they put up in the staff room or revisit at future team meetings, and they'll commit to very simple things, 2 clear commitments. One thing we'll do more of, one thing we might do less of as well. So great resource there, and I hope lots of teams will get some mileage out of that one. Second one, these resources can be used together or in isolation. The intention is, teams might want to group them together or use them in successive meetings sometimes. But this next one takes it a little bit further and asks teams to create a belonging canvas. And the intention here is that they can create this sort of grid, if we go on to page 2, around things that make the people in the team feel that they belong. What barriers are there so that we can be aware of them and where it might be difficult? What do we already do well, and what do we commit to doing more of? So along the same lines as that first resource, but perhaps a little bit of a different format. Again, this might be something that goes up in a staff room. On the first page, we've got some examples here. So things that make people feel that they belong. It might be things that you mentioned in the chat as part of our icebreaker, feeling heard, feeling trusted, treated fairly, What barriers might there be? It might be cliques in the team, particularly in bigger teams. Those might be challenges for some teams, might be poor communication, or areas where we could definitely improve. It might when people feel excluded from decisions. And I think these sorts of things can open up conversations like often in TED around, okay, what's the right balance with this? Where are there opportunities to improve? And where are the barriers that are just part and parcel of how we work that we need to be mindful of and try our best to work around them with the resource, the time, the capacity that we have. Things we already do well might be things like regular team meetings, one-to-ones, it might be TED itself. And what we do more of, it might be being more encouraging people to be able to admit mistakes. It's okay when we do that. And I think there's this idea you might have heard of sort of failing forward or learning together through, understanding where we perhaps get it wrong, where we make mistakes. So I think if we can encourage that in teams, that can be a good thing. And then another one, so we did a session a while ago around compassionate team conversations, and I suppose this links to some of those resources as well, of how can we compassionately challenge poor behaviours in a way which is supportive and helps people to sort of move towards the behaviours that we aspire to as a team. So again, useful resource, I think. Hopefully lots of teams will like that. Next one, this one's more of a bit of a checklist, really. It might be something that a team leader uses or checks through with the team. And the idea with this one, inclusive team habits audit, it's got some key features of inclusive teams, some around team communication, around respect, around leadership and psychological safety. And the idea is that as a team, you'll have an open discussion around which of these things do we do, which do we maybe not do. It's got some useful tips on here. So I've put in here, remember, tip for a team leader, it's okay if you don't check every box on the list. So unchecked boxes are those opportunities to work as a team towards improvement. It's those opportunities to explore things. So it's not necessarily about trying to get 100% on this. It's about understanding where are our strengths, where are there areas for improvement. And again, we've got some reflective questions for the team. What are our strongest areas? Where needs attention? What one habit would make the biggest difference? So often in TED, our intention is not to create more work for teams. It's around getting them thinking about the right things to do and thinking about those maybe 2 or 3 quick sort of changes, things we can embed into our team culture and everyday practice. So that's that one. And final one, if I just scroll up to the top, is this one around called walking in my shoes. So this is a bit more of a scenario exercise, and the intention here gives a bit of guidance for the team leader, but the idea is that it gives a few different scenarios that are, I think, relevant to a lot of teams that teams could relate to, and it gets them to think about those from different people's perspectives that might be involved in any particular scenario. So thinking around how might different people experience a situation, what assumptions might there be, what could we do differently, what different approaches are there. So just to sort of flash up, I think we've got 4 scenarios altogether, but we've one around the team meeting. So it's a team meeting, manager believes everyone can attend, but what situations might arise where someone struggles to attend those meetings? What do we know from the way our team works, maybe? And I think this is the case for a lot of teams. How do we get our meetings right? And particularly, I think in bigger teams, how do we strike a balance between trying to make something which is fit for purpose for everybody, but making sure we achieve what we're trying to do with those meetings as well. Second one is around speaking up. So a new member of staff never contributes during team meetings. So what might be affecting that situation? What sorts of things could influence that situation? And I guess it gets teams to think around how can we encourage people to contribute? What ways can we create psychological safety in our team? What do we maybe already do well? What could we do differently? Third one Most team social events take place in pubs after work, so who might feel excluded from that, what barriers could exist, what could make participation easier to attend in work social events. And then the final one is change, and I think most teams can relate to this one. A major change is announced. Some people embrace it immediately, others seem resistant, which I think is a theme that I'm seeing more and more from NHS teams lately, and I think exploring that together can be really useful. So asking questions like, how might it affect different people differently, what experiences might influence different reactions, and how can we support each other, what do we need from our leaders, but also what's realistic expectations of our leaders as well, because I often think when I talk to team leaders about change, they feel that things are maybe changing that are outside their control. So sometimes it's hard to think around, how do I support my team when maybe I don't have the answers or there is uncertainty. So it can help to unpack those conversations and help teams think about what's right for us right now, when do we check back in, what are those right things to do. To cap off this exercise, it asks teams to reflect and think about those situations. Maybe you can use those situations as a way of sort of removing some of the emotion from it, from your own team's perspective. But then the second half gets you to think about, how might these situations be relevant to us, and how might it reflect on how we work. And then again, moving the team towards some commitment. So it's that action planning stage of TED. Okay, what have we learned through these conversations? What are we going to commit to between now and when we next run our TED survey? And how are we going to make that a reality? How are we going to make space to do these things? So a few different resources in there. I can see a few people, lots of sort of positive feedback, I'm thinking. I don't know, Sam, I don't know if you picked out anything from the chat while they've been going along.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people genuinely saying that they're really helpful, good ideas for resources. Some people talked about, well, I first of all mentioned to Gemma, we're just about to do a campaign. Every week we're doing like a short 5-minute check-in for managers, so they could just ask a question at the next stand-up or their next huddle on the wards and things like that. So I just said to Gemma, like, I wonder if Heather could include a link to one of these, because the next theme is inclusion, so that's perfect. And then I think Chloe and Claire have just reflected on how this is nicely timed, because they're having a We All Belong campaign, so perhaps they could use that as part of it. And then, yeah, Becky's mentioned that she felt that these were good resources, they'll be helpful, building on psychological safety, because that's the absolute foundation. And then Helen's mentioned, yeah, particularly with org change, she can see how that this might be useful, particularly with new teams as they come through. And then I just commented on how we're really finding scenarios are helpful, particularly to get people, you just said, around removing the emotion first, perhaps just getting them to reflect on that team or that situation over there before they then start to think about what that might mean for themselves. And then Becky's just mentioned you've added in an inclusion and belonging to your TED to try and understand how psychological safe, what kind of question is it, Becky?
I'll pull it out. It asks around how inclusive does it feel in this team. But I think I ask it in a negative way, which I could do to reframe in a positive. So I almost ask them about exclusion. Do people feel excluded? Thus far, when I've had a quick cursory look at teams that have started using that new question set, there's nothing that indicates, oh, we've got a problem here. But I'm a bit suspicious of that, if I'm honest. But we'll see as we get more of a swell of that data coming through the new question set.
That sounds good. It's interesting that, isn't it? Sort of the connotation that by asking a question one way or another, and how that can, you
get people saying things like, absolutely not, this does not happen in our team. It really kind of evokes quite an emotive response.
I always find it really difficult, because sometimes in the questions in the staff survey I get really annoyed because they do go straight, it's a negative before, and so I do think sometimes does that
sway,
what's the word, influence, sway. Coming in, Sean.
Thank you. I just we talked about psychological safety. Just been mindful that a lot of the teams in health service are not static teams, especially clinical. You know, they move about, they do shift work, etc. And one person can have a major, either positive or negative impact on that team and how that team perform and how much psychological safety they feel that they've got. So it's just it was a conversation I had this morning with somebody in the team. I just thought it was quite relevant to this conversation.
We see that. I mean, I see that all the time. And I did some stuff actually at Manchester Met when I was working there on tribes, especially. It was linked to change, but sort of how can you work with an individual who perhaps is strong and does have a really strong power or influence within a team? You know, are there different, sometimes there's no fixing that situation, and I get that, but there's other opportunities sometimes. You know, how do you help them be a leader but kind of bring them in? How do you give them a sense of actually you can use your power for good perhaps and actually bring them in board, or give them some responsibility, or even just explain to them you are a really strong and influential colleague in the team. How can you support me in this change? Sort of giving them some responsibility can sometimes really help. Sometimes it doesn't, don't get me wrong. But I did some research with an academic who really focused on tribes in the workplace. So it was a really interesting piece of work. Going back to here, we've got Gemma explaining how, opening up conversations. Oh, and I think Claire said, real scenarios and lived experiences has been really impactful in their training. We're definitely putting scenarios into lots of work that we're doing at the moment. And I think, you've talked again, haven't you, Gemma, there around scenarios. Storytelling, isn't it? And I think when we talk about how engagement actually occurs, storytelling and narratives are so powerful. You know, that's why TED Talks, where people start off telling their own personal stories and how they went on that journey. That's why they're so powerful, because we're stories, we're humans, we all love stories, don't we? It's at the heart of who we are. Chloe's mentioned that you've had an EDI free text. Tell us a little bit, Chloe, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot. What have you started to see around that, or is that quite new?
It is still relatively new, but I think we've seen some really good examples of things that have been happening, and we've been working with our EDI lead to kind of, put maybe support in place around teams that have maybe flagged anything that's, not going so well, or where maybe they're unsure about what the team do that's, the proactive approach to EDI. Otherwise, it's kind of using those as examples of where really good things are happening as well. So I think it's just helped us get a bit more focus and clarity on what is actually happening at team level, which has been really useful.
That's really good. Thank you so much, Chloe. And then the last thing, thank you, Becky, so much for kindly sharing your questions. I think it always helps. We do have sort of a one-stop shop of all of our optional questions that we could potentially recirculate and update them, just if you are looking to either refresh yours, or maybe you've never set them. We know that there are some trusts who haven't set them yet. If you do want, we could perhaps as the follow-up, Lee, just share all the questions that are in the TED system at the moment, in case anybody is looking to re-establish them or come up with ideas. Coming in, Becky.
It's early days, but this conversation is prompting me to think, and we've only got a few teams that have started using these new questions. Is there a way to pull off the qualitative data in a table format so you can see it for all teams? I know you can get the scores per question, can't you?
Yeah. So the developers can do it, but maybe that, Lee, can we add that to a new development to do the free text? I know that they'll do it by asking, so we can get that done, Becky, for you, but I'm wondering if that needs to be an additional export at some point.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and I'd just throw the question out there. If we did that, would it be helpful if that was in the existing export spreadsheet as an extra column, or would it be better as a standalone export? I just want to get people's thoughts before I speak to our developers.
So everybody would have at least 2, even if you don't have it in your bespoke. So you would have what makes us proud and what one thing would you do to improve. So those are everything. Everybody has those free texts.
I think you struggle to get it on the existing spreadsheet because you've only got 1 line per questions, but then you get quite multiple responses to the free text.
Yeah.
So I don't know how it would look in one combined download.
Okay.
They'd have to put semicolon and just put all the comments, wouldn't they, across like one big line?
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be helpful if you could separate them into different columns, maybe. But yeah, I think that's a great suggestion, Becky. Leave it with us. As always, I'll pose that one to our developers. The answer they always give us is if that information's in the system, they can present it in whatever way we want. So yeah, I'll have a chat with them and see what they feel would work.
And while you're thinking about it, do add into the chat pros and cons as well, or opportunities, things that we might want to think of that might be better or not good. I don't know, because we'll take all of that. And I know we haven't fully agreed how we may or may not use AI in the future, but once that's part of the conversations, that's potentially our next investment. I don't like saying yes or no directly, but that is something we want to do. So if we can make that work, I'm just wondering how we make sure that we keep the option for the free text to also be perhaps themed and analysed with AI as well. We just have to be thoughtful. There's lots of things we have to think about when we start to introduce AI. Okay, brilliant. And I'm just checking that I've not missed anything. Yeah, so Claire's just shared, one of her bespoke questions. Our team is free from all forms of bullying and harassment. And then got some ideas around standalone, collecting themes, theme wheel for free text comments. Yeah, we have created a resource, in case anybody isn't aware, that talks about how can you use AI at the moment, using maybe something like Copilot to download and upload, things to watch out for, checking your free text comments before you put them into Copilot in case there is anything in there that might be things that we shouldn't be sharing externally. But yeah, so currently people can use it, and we've encouraged our team managers to look at how they find it helpful. Okay, I think I've covered all the comments there.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, and thanks everybody. That input's really valuable. And as Sam says, I'll share our bank of bespoke questions that different trusts have used. I'll share the examples that we've got in the follow-up from today's session. But if some of you have created some new ones as well, I'll have a look in and update that document, because it sounds like you're capturing some really great things. And I think ED&I is one of those topics where it can be useful to sort of capture some of that. Something we're often quite cautious in TED, because we don't want to ask anything sort of too specific, which might cause people not want to fill in the TED survey. But I think any useful data like that are things that we can learn from together as well. So yeah, I'll share that question bank with you. Just to pick up on a couple of things, I'll come back to the website briefly. So the other one I wanted to show you, if you start searching for inclusion, I've shown you the new ones, but there is an existing one called TED Ensuring an Inclusive Approach. And this one is more of a guide for team leaders, really. But this sort of gives a bit of a guide on how to start to broach some of these things, how you might use inclusive language, how can you encourage participation in your team conversations. So guides on how team leaders can broach these sorts of topics, because I think sometimes without a bit of guidance, team leaders are a bit reluctant to sort of get into some of these conversations where they might feel a bit outside their comfort zone. So that can be a useful, more of a reading resource prior to going into that sort of team conversation. And then if I just come back, just picking up on what you were saying there, Sam, around AI, if I type AI into the search box, we've created a resource there around useful AI prompts. So there's some useful ideas for if you are pulling some of your data into TED, or if a team is pulling their TED report into Copilot, whatever AI they might use, this can be a useful resource as well to help teams use AI to help prompt the conversations, really, because we never want AI to replace the conversation. That's, for me, that's the most important step within TED, but this guide sort of helps teams to use AI in a way which can be helpful for them. And we do have some useful, I know we've had some conversations about AI in this group. We've got some useful things on our YouTube channel from past conversations as well. Fab. Okay, so the second thing I'll stick on the website for, I just wanted to broach with you. I did mention this a little bit at our last coffee catch up for those of you that were there. Something we've been talking with our developers about is opportunities to customize elements of TED. So those of you who perhaps were involved heavily when your organisation first got on board with TED will be aware that you can change the banner at the top here. So you might notice this looks maybe a bit different than your own. At Lancs Teaching, we currently have this 10 years of TED logo as part of our banner. Great one which Lindsay's created. She's created some other ones which I think she shared, but we can definitely share with you if you want a generic TED template. But I know some of you might have the image of nurses, which is on the sort of default one when you first get up and running with TED. Some of you have tailored these to put your own trust logo in there. So that's one element of customization that you currently have in TED. The other area which you can currently customize is under each of the themes. And if I scroll right down to the bottom of one of the themes, it never looks too good on our test website, but it will have your trust name in there and your logo if you've uploaded it, and you can customize links in here to your intranet site or specific resources that you might have saved somewhere else. One of the things we've been talking about with our developers is opportunities to further customize TED so that you can tailor it to perhaps give it a look and feel of your organization. So if I just come back to the dashboard, one area we've been talking about is up at the top here. We've got this development content. Now, some of you might have clicked on this. Most people don't. I've got to say, I don't really use this, and really at the moment it just provides some links to the different themes. But I would like to create something in here which you could make your own. So you could change the wording of this so that it wasn't development content. You could change it to something relevant to your own trust, and you could put information, links to resources, maybe images of your OD team or you know, your education centre or whatever. You can pop those on there to customize this content. And the other area we've been thinking about is on the themes. You might want to customize some of these images. So at the moment we have sort of our default images of different nurses, people in hospital environments maybe. You might want to customize those, put up images of your own staff maybe, or your own trust values, those sorts of things could go on there. So I just wanted to sort of throw the question out. Well, we've got quite a lot of you here. Is first of all, is that something which you would like, which you would appreciate? And then if you did that, what sorts of things would you like to put on these pages? And is there anything else which you'd like to be able to customize, I guess, is our question at this stage before our developers get on with actually sort of making it. Yeah, I'll just leave that question for the room. Go on, Sam. I'll let you come in. I know it's the first time we've sort of been discussing
we only
this.
just talked about it this morning because I've been off for a couple of weeks, haven't I? I was thinking for that development content tab at the top. Like, what if that said, for us particularly, you know, team development at Lancs Teaching or something like that. So it was quite bespoke to just Lancs Teaching. And then when you clicked on that, perhaps it had a link to, I don't know, like if we're doing OD consultancy work and we had like a form that people fill in, and I know a lot of trusts have that, could it be that that is where they can complete the form? Or I don't know, maybe we could have a link to our TED drop-in service, or do you know what I mean? I'm just trying to think like what other information could be useful there. Come on in, Sean.
I've got mixed feelings. I like the idea of, you know, putting some of his own slant on some of the things, but I also think there's something to be said for the national standardization. And one of the things that we sell TED on is that it's not just been bespoke to our organisation. This has been run across the country. So
yeah,
I might need to do a bit more reflection on that one.
It's a good idea.
I think that's a really good point, Sean. And I think, as always, it's about striking a balance. We want to give you some customizability, but at the same time, we don't want it to look like it isn't TED, so that it wouldn't be familiar. Perhaps if someone's coming from one organisation to another who's used TED before, we don't want to change the layout in any way. I think, you know, we're really proud of our sort of colour schemes and our branding, and most of all the accessibility of TED, that it's quite simple to use and navigate and find what you need. So yeah, absolutely take that on board, that it's important to get that balance right. Stephen, would you like to go in?
Yeah, we've been discussing this amongst our team, and know some similar Samantha as it feels like a useful place to have for, I don't know, request forms for OD departments and things like that. There is this thing of links to separate sites, and I think you're probably right keeping it very minimal, because often we're going to try and outside of firewalls and things. We've thought about putting our own, you know, like links to even things like appraisal documentation, which could be linked that could be helpful. But I think you're right. I am in two minds. I think it'd be nice to have a one-stop shop sort of approach to these things. However, in reflection, I think we need to be able to keep it separate and keep the product or the offer separate, so we can manage it a bit more. But I want to make it as simple as possible for any leaders doing it, to get access to the things that they all want, and having it on a separate, none behind a firewall thing would possibly help. But that means suddenly you're hosting all of our content and things, and that's a whole different server problem, I think, in terms of hosting all that stuff. So yeah,
we've always said, like, on the sections that you can currently customize, that it's best to hyperlink back to your existing like L&D pages on your intranet, because as well, you don't need an extra job to update things. So for example, if you're updating your intranet page, and let's be honest, we all forget to do that anyway, don't we? The last thing we want to do is have another place to remember. So there is really some important things around the pros and cons, like Sean said. And I think keeping it simple is absolutely at the heart of every discussion that Lee and I have. We constantly come back to, are we overcomplicating it? How can we keep it simple? And I think there are definitely some pros and cons, isn't there, that we need to make clear and make sure that we think that through as well. And I think you're right to say, Lee, around people moving from trust, because we've had that so many times where people have moved from one trust and then they've gone to another trust and they've picked up TED and they've already done their training, so it's straight. So we are seeing that happen, and that's even people coming through saying, oh, I've got to this trust and they don't have TED. Can you speak to their OD department? Can you give me a free trial? And we you know, we're doing that, and we're helping people to get on board with TED. So it's really interesting. It's a good one to think through.
Yeah, great points, everyone. And yeah, appreciate what you're saying there, Stephen, about, you know, making sure. I think you don't want it to get out of date, so I would be cautious about changing too much. So yeah, and I guess each trust might want to approach this in a different way, which I think is what we want to achieve, that you can use it if you want, but if you don't want to, then that's absolutely fine. You still get all the content that we have across all of our trusts is still in there with TED. And I think for a lot of organisations, our experience has been that you'll sort of evolve the way you use TED over time. I think, I know a lot of trusts who've set up some of their bespoke elements when they first got on board with TED, but it's really not until you have been using it for maybe 6 months, 12 months that you actually get a feel for what's the right thing to have on there, what's the right way that we want to use it. So yeah, great point. Just want to pick up, so yeah, a lot of people like this idea, got ideas, things you can maybe start to talk to your teams about. What would that look like? Do you feedback to us? I noticed, Chloe, you mentioned on a slight tangent an area for TED manager resources. So absolutely, this is something we have got in the pipeline actually, that we're making a team leader hub area. I have spoke about it before, and it is something we're working on with our developers. And my sort of vision for that is to have, again, quite simple. We don't want to pack too much information on one screen, but have things like some recommended toolkits maybe for new teams if you're a first time user of TED. Also some links to some of our YouTube videos, so we can put like how-to videos of different things, so that again, for brand new users, it gives them a one-stop shop for all the things. Because as much as I'm really proud of all the resources we've now got on TED and how it's grown over the years, the downside to putting more resources on there is for a new user, someone who's new into this, it can be quite overwhelming. So yeah, definitely we're working on that idea of a team leader hub page in TED, which will just be a sort of a quick stop for all your sort of essentials. And then maybe when a team gets to their second TED, when they've been using it a while, that's maybe when they start to explore experimenting with different types of toolkits and things like that. So yeah, love that one. Okay, and yeah, other bits coming into the chat. So yeah, I think it's something we'll keep talking to you about. We are talking to our developers, and we are conscious of getting that balance right. So we'll absolutely work with you on that. Okay, so I'll come back to my slides now. And back to our sort of key topic today. So today's sort of first main topic is around what we've been talking around inclusion, how equality and diversity is approached within different teams. And it's really around this idea that we know, there's research out there to show that people engage when they feel safe, they feel valued, respected, and able to contribute. And that really underpins what we try to do with TED. And in the toolkits that we've got in TED, things that we've discussed on past events, we try to sort of help teams and focus on topics which will help teams build things like psychological safety, good team communication. It will help leaders be inclusive and role model inclusive practices. We've also got resources around well-being and involvement as well that sort of all lead into these themes of inclusive teams. So it's about, how can we encourage teams to model that best practice and also find what's right for them. What we also know, and one of the reasons that we've been able to offer TED to your organisations and to sort of expand it over the years, is that TED aligns very closely with the people promise. And I think themes around diversity and inclusion, and definitely that at a team level, sort of underpins a lot of what is in the people promise. So if we look at some of those things that I think the rainbow illustration is the best way to look at it. The top one there is about being compassionate and inclusive. So that sits at the core of I guess the culture that we want to encourage in the NHS. And throughout those, right down at the bottom, we've got we are a team. So teams are perhaps at the centre of all these sorts of things. And our approach with TED has always been that if we can get teams working on this at a local level and we can replicate that multiple times across our organisations, then that influences all of these people promise elements at an organisational level. And our data over the years has shown that when we do have more TED activity, we start to see those things coming through in the staff survey, which is based on these people promise element. So this topic of inclusive teams is so important, and I often think that is the best place to approach it, as much as there's definitely a place for us having organisational strategies and approaches to inclusion and diversity, where it actually sort of is put into practice is in the everyday workspace. It's what teams do on a day-to-day basis. It's how they talk about different topics, how they support each other, how they collaborate perhaps on different areas. So this is why we've wanted to make it a focus of today's session and some of those toolkits. So question I wanted to throw out to the room at this point is, what does inclusion look like in teams? So I'm thinking, what are the actual practical things that teams might do to create an inclusive environment? Are there any ideas? Feel free to put your hand up or pop them in the chat if you've got any ideas. Just to sort of prompt you while you're thinking. What sorts of things help people feel heard? What sorts of things help people feel respected in the team? How do people feel safe to be able to challenge or able to contribute, or valued for who they are? Yeah, share your ideas. Oh, Rachel, I've seen you've put in the chat multiple ways to speak up. Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with that. I think this is where we've already mentioned quite a few things. We talked about staff survey. TED absolutely is one of those things. And again, I think it's about teams exploring what's right for us, what's the right mechanism for us. But definitely agree with that. Becky, you've put in there team meetings, shared ownerships of outcomes, turn taking. Do you want to come in, Becky? What do you mean by turn taking? Is it sort of giving everyone their space, or go on? Oh, you're on mute, Becky.
In a team meeting, making sure everybody's having the opportunity to comment on the agenda or come prepared. So there's like things like Matthew Syed's, golden minutes, I think he calls them. And then Nancy Klein's got a really nice approach as well in there around showing up, being accountable, but also everybody having a voice.
Yeah, brilliant. Love that. Definitely. And yeah, you put the time to think approach as well. Yeah, I think that is perhaps preempting things prior to your meetings, talking about what's on the agenda, so that people do have that space to think and be able to bring something so that they can come along and contribute. Love that one. Sam, you've put in making sure people across different shifts. So I thought about, I think that's super relevant to a lot of NHS teams who do work different shift patterns. I've definitely worked with a few teams who, or a few departments who, the day shift team and the night shift team feel separated. They don't feel like one team, and although they're perhaps working on the same ward, they absolutely have to collaborate because they're working for the same patients to achieve the same ends. Often they do feel like two very separate team cultures, and that can be really challenging when often you see each other very fleetingly, or you do feel like different teams. So yeah, I think absolutely it's important for teams to think about, how do we manage that relationship in the best way.
I've had some times as well, even with an admin team, so they weren't clinical, but they had a lot of part-time different working patterns, and I think some people found it very hard to feel included when, say they had a day off and then an important meeting goes in on that day off, just having to constantly be the one to go, sorry, don't forget that's my day off, sorry, don't forget, almost like feeling guilt as well, like they shouldn't have their non-working day. I don't know, I've had people share that with me before, and that's a real basic, isn't it, in terms of getting those basic things right to feel included.
Yeah, absolutely. Just going a bit further down the list, Lindsay has said, simply asking for contributions in whatever way that looks like. So email, verbal meetings, so offering opportunities to share your contributions. Yeah, definitely agree with that. And I think something I reflect on often, it's important to revisit those approaches sometimes. I know, Sam, I think we mentioned this morning that occasionally we revisit we have like a ways of working. We have is it a OneNote or a whiteboard? We've got something that we use to put on this is how we work, this is our approach to different things. And as team members, we can put questions on there for if we're not quite sure what's our approach to maybe sharing things. But something I think is important as well is to regularly revisit those sorts of things, because what was right 12 months ago might be a bit different now, or maybe we've learned or found some challenges with the approach we've tried in the past, and maybe we do want to reinvigorate it and try something new. So this is somewhere where TED can encourage teams to open up these sorts of conversations and thinking about, okay, what opportunities do we have to contribute? How can we create those safe spaces to do it? And whether it be through maybe our one-to-ones, whether it's through TED, whether it is through, other forums that we have as a team, what is right for us and what fits the way we work in the best way possible. So yeah, absolutely love that one. Chloe, you mentioned our feedback tends to be around people feeling respected, safe to speak up, contribute, be themselves, and that the manager takes time to consider each team member as an individual. Yeah, absolutely love that. I think thinking about this from a team leader's perspective, I think I see the challenges sometimes team leaders have, particularly, we see some really big teams in the NHS, so it's difficult to get that right. So I do think it's important that team leaders have these sorts of open and honest conversations around to what extent can we do that, and to what extent can the team help the team leader do that in a way that encourages that inclusion as well. But yeah, absolutely love that. Claire, you mentioned booking team meetings on team days when everybody's in. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I would encourage that. Again, that can be a challenge for some teams. If we think of that situation where there's night shift workers and day shift workers, how can we get a space where we're all available at the same time? So I think encouraging teams to explore these things and see what's the best that we can do in sometimes a tricky situation to get this right helps to give people that confidence that as a team, we are inclusion focused. We want to make the best efforts to create inclusive conversations. But sometimes we can't always be perfect because of the systems we work in, the nature of the work that we do. So we need to be mindful of where there's challenges and where there are opportunities as well. Gemma, great suggestion. So feeling heard, it's not just in the moment being able to share thoughts, but to see something happen from it. The so what? Yeah, absolutely. So what does that actually come to? And again, this fits in really well with TED because we encourage these sorts of team conversations in TED. But actually, the conversation's only as good as the actions that it actually promotes. What are we going to do to put this into practice? And coming back to some of those resources, it's often the last bit of those resources where we say, right, what's our commitment? What are we actually going to commit to that's going to make a difference there? And how are we going to keep checking in to make sure that we are embedding this into our practice? I think that is so important. I don't know, Gemma, do you want to come in and expand on that a little bit from your perspective?
Yeah, I guess, it's something I hear quite a lot where colleagues will come to me and say, we had a meeting and we were encouraged to speak, and everyone had, or encouraged to email in whichever way that worked for them, but afterwards nothing happened. So it's that inclusion in the moment sounded great, but what happened after that? How do we keep that inclusive practice happening, I guess?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think that can be a danger sometimes that we've had a conversation about inclusion, so we're sort of committing to something, but actually, what does that actually mean? And sometimes the approach we take might not work in the way we intended it to do. So it's important that occasionally we check back in on what approach we've taken, and if it hasn't quite worked, we readdress that and think, actually, can we try something different? Did it not quite land the way we intended it to? And be open with the team around, you know, what might not be working as well, I think is really important. So yeah, absolutely love that. Thank you. Just a couple more. Rachel, you've mentioned inviting comments and feedback from those who might not feel as comfortable to speak up. Yeah, definitely. Or seeking perspectives from those who are less likely to offer it without being asked. Yeah, sometimes it's about asking direct questions, and sometimes I think it's about understanding your team and knowing your team from a team leader's perspective. But definitely things like TED can help to prompt those conversations and help people input to direct what those conversations are going to be about, because I think the TED report gives you a sort of a more tangible way of approaching some of these topics to say, okay, we can quite quickly see what are our key priorities, give recognition for the things we're doing well as well, and really targeting on the things that matter most to our team members. Sam, absolutely, yeah, you mentioned civility is at the heart of this. It's definitely something we have a big push for at Lancs Teaching Hospitals. There's some civility resources in TED as well. So yeah, absolutely love those things. Great suggestions, everyone. Thank you. I also wanted to throw this question out. Which TED themes do you think link to inclusion? Put all of the different themes that are in TED there. I think there's definitely threads that run through different ones of these, but just interested to get people's thoughts on which of these do you feel, which of these, if you feel there's an inclusion issue maybe, or you want to understand inclusion, which of these sections might you go to on the TED report? Yeah, Rachel says all of them. Yeah, absolutely. I think they can. Oh, my camera frozen. No, I'm back now. Yeah, I think they can. I think there's elements of all of them. And coming back to what I showed about the people promise, I think there's elements in all of those areas that are contributing towards that same thing. I think we have these conversations about these different topics, but ultimately it's all about team culture. It's about creating positive team cultures, and all of these factors sort of lead into, okay, what makes us a team with a really great, inclusive, supportive team culture? And all of these factors that are in TED help to be part of that. Chloe, you mentioned valuing individuals. Yeah, I think that's the one at its core, which is perhaps most specifically linked to how inclusive the team feels. Becky's mentioned working together and communication as well. So yeah, definitely agree with that. And if we look at some of the TED questions, so I've just pulled out ones that stood out to me. So these are questions from the core TED survey. So we've got one around working together there, around we value and respect each other. So teams will get a score for that one. Around team communication, there's that question around team members being able to bring up problems and tough issues. So that's sort of lead into that psychological safety question. In the leadership section, we've a question around being able to raise concerns to our manager. So that's specifically on that relationship with your manager. And then there's two questions in the valuing individuals one that ask direct questions. Do I feel supported in this team? Do I feel valued? And these are ones where if these were scoring lower in a team, you'd be encouraging a team leader to open up this topic and start to think around, actually, what is it about the way we work that maybe doesn't make us feel valued or supported? How could we do this better as a team? And I think just sometimes having that conversation can help team members see that the team leader cares, but also that the team cares about creating that supportive and inclusive culture as well. Yeah, Becky's mentioned in the chat that a leadership guide on inclusive leadership as well sort of links to this. So yeah, lots of resources in TED as well around how leaders can get that balance right. And I talked about role modeling earlier as well, that fits into that. Okay, so last few questions I wanted to throw out on this topic. And this is really just to get a feel from what you're seeing in your teams, maybe teams you're supporting or what you see in your organisation. I know a couple of you mentioned you've added EDI specific questions into TED to get more of a feel from this. So just wanted to get an idea, what sorts of inclusion issues do show up in teams that you see out there? Does TED help you spot them in any ways? And if you have had interventions, what's worked, and I think my intention with this will help us create future resources with TED and perhaps guidance for teams of how TED can be part of that intervention and can help teams work towards that culture that they want. So yeah, any thoughts? Rachel, would you like to go in?
Yeah, please. So the question around where do inclusion issues show up most often in teams. So for us, quite a number of our teams will have a high percentage of international nurses, and actually there's almost like a reverse exclusion in terms of what we tend to find, and it's really a difficult one to address, is that the international nurses will tend to talk to each other, talk in their own language, and I don't have a problem with this, but actually what we tend to find in the TED comments is that actually that is resulting to other people feeling excluded because they can't actually access the conversation due to that language barrier. And I'm not really sure how to support team leads to address that problem.
Yeah, good comment there, Rachel. I think it is something that I've been around. I'm not sure if Sam or Gemma's come across situations like this, but when we've got international colleagues, it's around how do we create a culture which recognises that diversity that we might have in our team as well. I don't know, Sam or Gemma, if you've experienced this with any of our teams.
So we have a high proportion of international colleagues. We did have a large number of people join us. Was it about 3 or 4 years ago? So Gemma, you might have some examples of where you've had things like this. And I think it has definitely worked both ways, where international colleagues have felt excluded and treated different. And we have also had the situation where you mentioned there, Rachel, where actually then they created safeness, I think, in created their own support to each other, but then also it's had an unintentional consequence, I would describe it as. But then of course that creates disruption or segregation between two parts of the team. And I'll hand over to Gemma because you are more of an expert in this. One thing that I keep saying is, so if a colleague has been here as an international colleague for 4-5 years, I think that's what we're talking about now, because it was before I joined, and I've worked in our trust now for 4 years, I think. At what point are they just a nurse? When are they not an international nurse anymore? And that's one of the biggest things for me. They're very much labelled in our trust, I believe, is my view. Gemma, can I ask you to come in on that?
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, Sam. And I was going to say, we find, we have the situation where international students feel the same, and non-international colleagues as well are both saying the same thing, a bit like, oh, we're separate, we're not together. And there's part of that, there's probably a lot of things to think about too, but ultimately there is that sense everyone is a colleague, and it's how do we break down those barriers. And I don't really have an answer right now. We're doing some work at the moment with international midwives to find out more, because this has been something that they've talked to us a lot about, and we're almost reflecting it back and saying what would be helpful. How do we break that barrier down? Because I'm not in that position myself to know what that barrier is like. So what is it like for them, and what would be helpful, and how do we almost work together to reduce that barrier?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a listening piece there and an understanding piece. And again, it's likely one of those situations where there'll be different situations in every different team, because there will be different people, different personalities, different backgrounds coming in there. So yeah, it's there's definitely an understanding piece to be done there. Just come to some of the hands. Rachel, I think your hand was up first. Let's go in.
Yeah, I think this is such a big topic, and I think was it Sammy, sorry, had kind of mentioned around the labeling of kind of international nurses versus just nurses. And I think one of the challenges that we kind of pose to teams when we talk about people using different languages, it usually comes up around not necessarily when they're working clinically, because they're aware they need to speak English in front of the patients, etc., make patients feel comfortable, understand what's going on. But it's usually around things like when they're in the break room, they're having discussions in their home language. I think some of the challenge that we put back to teams is, well, understands that for you, you know, that might feel like a bit of a barrier for you not understanding what they're saying. But this firstly might be the only opportunity they have to speak in their own language. So that might be very exciting for that person. They only come into contact with them at work and it's their way of connecting to their heritage. But equally, you know, can you break those barriers down by extending a hand of friendship? You know, these people might find that they're the only people they can speak to on their lunch break. And so they do revert to their kind of national language because they are both in that place, they both speak that language, they both feel most confident like that. But, you know, have we actually made them feel included as if they can spend their lunch break with us? Have we said to them, you know, why don't you come and sit with us? Let's have a conversation. Or even approaching and saying, look, like, your language sounds beautiful, like, can you teach us a little bit? Let's spend a bit of time together. So I think there's very much a challenge of how inclusive have we been towards those people? Because if we find that they are then spending all their time together on their lunch breaks, it's likely that they don't feel comfortable or a sense of belonging with us. So I think the conversation that we've started having is more of a, you know, let's find ways to be inclusive, which aren't causing us to be uncomfortable, them to be uncomfortable. And I thought that someone shared with me the other day, which I thought was quite interesting, was that would we feel the same way if, you know, a couple of people were whispering in English in the corner and we couldn't hear them? You know, we don't know what those people are saying. Does that make us feel uncomfortable in the same way? Because effectively, that's the same thing. You know, we can't understand what these colleagues are saying because they're speaking a different language. But equally, if someone was speaking quietly to another colleague in a corner, we wouldn't necessarily understand what they're saying because they're keeping that kind of to themselves. So I think there's a lot of different ways to look at it. But I think there should be a bit of challenge around, have we made them feel included? Are they speaking in their home language separately to others because they're not feeling included? And how can we get over that by extending the hand first? Would be kind of a challenge that I would make to that. So I don't know if that's helpful in terms of just another kind of thought around that, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. Thank you, Rachel. And I'm already starting to think that resource we have around sort of walking in someone else's shoes, there's sort of maybe a space for that sort of scenario so that a team can think about that scenario and how it might look through different people's lenses, why people might want to talk in their own language, you know, why that's important for them, but also from a team perspective, trying to have that open conversation around, you know, how do we make sure we support that, but make sure we do that in the right time, in the right place, in the right forums for us, because again, it can be different for different teams. But yeah, really useful input. Thanks, Rachel. Becky, I think you were next one to come in.
I think Rachel's just covered it all very beautifully and very articulately. It was that point around there are parameters and boundaries when you're in a clinical setting around patient safety, but then when you're in that more kind of social setting, I agree with everything Rachel's just said, and it's using that to prompt in a team, if you're facilitating a team discussion, some of assumptions people might be holding on to that are creating barriers and expectations that perhaps aren't thinking about it from the other person's perspective. So yeah, it's a difficult conversation to facilitate, I think, because it can often be fueled with emotion and discrimination, but it's very much in our organisation, and it needs to be a conversation that continually is had with teams and getting them to kind of reflect, really. Yeah. So.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I definitely agree with you there, Becky. And yeah, I think that's where I think when there is a lot of emotion around those things, it can help to look at a a fictional scenario that helps us think about it without thinking directly about our team first. So any opportunities where teams can explore that can be useful. But yeah, it's definitely, you can see where team leaders might be reluctant to have these conversations for fear of getting the tone wrong, or saying something that they didn't intend to, getting that balance wrong. So I think where TED and our support comes in is around how can we encourage team leaders to do that in the right way, and encourage teams to start to understand their own context and what's right for them. But yeah, great point. Claire, would you like to come in? I've noticed in the chat you've mentioned about a resource. I don't know if you want to tell us about that.
Yeah, I can mention that briefly. It actually started because it came up one of those same scenarios about people using their own language, but it was in the lunch break time, so that's fine. But it's still not fine because it might exclude others, that type of thing. And our EDIB lead was asked to write some guidance around language use, and then the chair of our diversity network said, if you're going to start talking about inclusive language use, it should be a broader topic, because otherwise you're actually singling out speakers of other languages. So the guidance shouldn't be about them, it should be about inclusive language use. So the guidance covers all sorts of things now in terms of neurodiversity, LGBTQ community. Like, it's quite a lengthy document. We do have a shortened version as well, so I will share that. But the reason I raised my hand is to go back to that lunch break example. Another thing people don't consider is how exhausting it is to operate in a second language the entire time. So even if your level of English is really, really good, when it comes to your break time, it's your break time. And to not have to speak in a second language, then it's your opportunity to recharge your brain. Yeah, so that should also be taken into account.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great point. And yeah, I think that's something that it is important to remind people about as well, because it's not often the thing that you might think about first. But yeah, I know you've offered in the chat to share that resource. We'll absolutely circulate that with the resources from this session, and maybe there's elements there that will be useful in a TED Toolkit for teams as well. So love that. Thank you. Rachel, would you like to come in? You got your hand up?
Yeah, I just thought of, and I really like that point around the exhaustion of speaking that other language, because I think it is a massive undertaking that people are having. But I just thought of kind of another example which might help in terms of kind of challenging people's thinking, which is that if I am a white woman, I do have like the privilege of that. If I was kind of sitting with someone else and using sign language in a break room with someone else, I think probably the perspective on it would be, isn't that lovely? Like, they're using sign language, like what a great thing, even though most people would not be able to understand what I'm saying. So why should that kind of be different if we've got people who are coming from different diverse backgrounds, who have different skin colors to us? Because probably the perspective will look very different if I was kind of using a language that was not understandable, such as sign language, versus a black person talking in their kind of native tongue. So I just think there are some examples that we can kind of use to challenge, which people might not have thought about in terms of those perspectives. And it's worth, as hard as it is worth opening those kind of conversations. Even in terms of that point you've kind of just made there about kind of, thinking about the language you use every day. When we go on holiday, we often, we potter off to France and we try and speak French, and it's very, very difficult for us to be doing that kind of all day, and we only know a few kind of phrases. So again, kind of getting into that mindset of how does that impact on us when we have to do that for a long period of time. So just some kind of thoughts in terms of using ideas to kind of challenge that kind of behavior and thoughts, because I think most people, when they raise it, it's usually because they're worried that someone's talking about them, or there's like some bullying and harassment going on, where it's simply kind of that misunderstanding, and they probably aren't talking about you at all, but you might feel that way because you're unable to understand, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely love that. Thanks, Rachel. And yeah, some more useful perspectives. And I think it does come back to that idea of how can we help people put themselves in someone else's shoes and see things through a different lens in these sorts of situations. So yeah, I'm definitely going to take on board a lot of what everyone said there, because I think there is space for another TED resource that helps teams think about these multiple different reasons that might be lead into these situations. And as always with TED, it's about prompting conversation so that teams can understand why it's important that people get their space to, you know, to be able to communicate in their own language, but again, decide on when that's right for us. How do we make sure it doesn't impact our service, but also it doesn't impact our team culture, but we create this inclusive environment where we can sort of embrace that diversity that we have in teams. Becky, would you like to come in?
Just a final thought, and there's no better way to get those scenarios that are actual real life scenarios from the people that are impacted by it. So international colleagues, that's something that we've done. We've done a video that really brings to life very subtle things within a clinical setting or a ward setting that indicates that actually we don't think you're capable. That's the message they're receiving. Or and it can be things like patient meals and making the assumption that you won't know what that is or how to do it. And what they're saying is, just give me the opportunity to understand. It's a different culture, it's a different way of doing things, but if you could just show me, you only have to show me once and I will understand, rather than just that exclusion of you can't do this. And those have been real examples that our colleagues in our organisation have brought to the fore and spoken to. So, because sometimes it can be very difficult to understand, what does this look like day to day, and what must it be like to be on the receiving end of it. So there's no better way to get some of those kind of scenarios than from the people that are experiencing it.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that, Becky. And I think it's definitely something, if those of you on the call today or anyone listening to the recording afterwards, if you do have examples which would be useful to share with us, let us know. And I think my takeaway from this, and perhaps something Gemma we can work on, is thinking about, you know, reaching out to those groups to get these sorts of examples which will sort of be thought-provoking for teams to have and help them sort of explore these in their own settings, because I think the more real life examples we can have, the more our teams can relate to it, because it's relevant things that they see and they sort of experience. Sam, would you like to come in?
Yeah, just as I think as well, there's something about the patient in this as well, because when we're learning about each other as colleagues and all our diverse needs and things, it also relates back to our patients as well, how they might be feeling, you know, in terms of their experience of patient care, having to, you know, we talked about their translating and trying to think about what people are saying. It can be hard as a native English speaker to understand what a doctor is saying or a nurse is saying and ask the right questions. And, you know, I even like write everything down, and I still find those conversations and consultations difficult. So I'm just thinking about how that can also be applied to how we think about our patient care as well, because I think when we improve our staff experience, it has that positive impact on our patient experience. And I did just put in the chat how, like, the current context that we are working in society and how fragmented things are feeling generally make these conversations harder, but they also make them more important. And I just thought that would be a really nice way to think. We talk a lot about social value and how important we are as an employer in the NHS and how the impact that we have on our society and our community. And I just think that at this time, at the moment in society generally, our role is bigger. It's almost like it's even more important that we get these things right as an employer as well, and a service provider as well.
Yeah, absolutely love that, Sam. Thank you. And thank you all. I think lots of really great examples shared there. And I think TED is an area which can help with these sorts of things. And we've talked a lot today about how we create those inclusive cultures. But TED isn't ever going to be the magic bullet for these sorts of things. It's not going to be that magic wand that solves these things. But what we can do is help teams understand what are compassionate ways of approaching these sorts of conversations. What are the ways that we can be open-minded to different ways of doing things, and I think that's where inclusion has a big place to fit in TED and in the team conversations that we encourage. Okay, Fab. So I am conscious of time, so I'm just going to move on to our second topic today for a bit of a conversation. This has come on the back of some sessions I've been running recently for some of our teams at Lancs Teaching around our 10 years of TED event, and I've called it the future of team engagement. And the idea is I've wanted team leaders to start thinking about actually what is our team going to look like in the long-term future. A couple of images on there, like, are we going to be working with robots? You know, there's the fear of what's AI. Is it going to turn on our head, completely change what skill sets we need, how we work, how we collaborate? And I think, again, this is something that might be different for different types of professional disciplines. But I think the thing to highlight is there's lots of change happening, as always, in the NHS. And when we start to think about what the future looks like for NHS teams, we do know there's a 10-year plan for the NHS now. There's a lot in that 10-year plan around the changes that the NHS and the government are hoping to move the NHS towards. So things like more community working, more, I guess, working across systems, embracing the use of technology in different capacities. So there's an awful lot of change that's either happening or on the horizon for an awful lot of teams. What we also know across our organisations, across the whole NHS, there's huge financial pressures to, cut costs, to make efficiency savings, to try and do things in a different way that will help us provide a more sustainable service, I guess, going forward. So there's a lot of service transformation happening. Things like hybrid working are more commonplace now, which definitely has benefits, but it also has drawbacks for the way our teams work. I've mentioned AI and digital tools are influencing the way we work more than ever. And again, in some ways, they're enhancing things that we do, but in some ways, they're detracting from things that we do as well. So that landscape is shifting for teams, and from team leaders, there are new expectations. So we know in the NHS there's a new leadership framework being rolled out. We know that there are changes in the expectations of our leaders and what they're required to do, that might be quite daunting from team leaders' perspective. So I wanted to use the last part of this session. Firstly, just to throw out this, we've tackled a lot of the big questions today, but I just wanted to throw this one out. Does anybody have any views on what they feel teams will look like in 5 years? Or, if we think, 2030, how are teams going to be affected by these changes? Any sort of initial thoughts, if you think that far ahead?
We might all be robots by the time that AI has anything to do with it.
Quite possibly. Yeah, who knows? Yeah, I think it's definitely having a bigger influence on what we do. And, maybe, we think about team leaders. Are we going to be led by AI in the future? Is that going to be setting our targets, objectives, things like that? Who knows with that one? Claire, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I have to be honest and say I'm really worried about it. There's, especially with the 10-year plan and the focus on digital, there's so much emphasis being put on that need, and so little money. And we're already seeing it, how it's like, well, what can we stop doing? What can we stop doing? And I'm worried it's things like this, like thinking about actually looking after our staff and how our teams work together, and that team engagement part. That's what's going to be left out. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can appreciate that, Claire.
Go backwards, all that work that's been done, and how do we support our teams, and all that just going to start to unravel.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think the things we've talked about today are about how can we bring teams closer together. And I think the danger is, with the shift towards more technology and more reliance on technology, the danger is that sort of comes between the human connections. and how people work together well, that the sort of individuals become just sort of a bolt-on to the direction technology is taking us. I think that's definitely a concern for a lot of people and for organisations, societies, lots of sort of things to navigate, I guess. Sam, you've got your hand up next. Would you like to go in?
Yeah, I mean, one initial worry, I have a hope as well, but I'll come back to that maybe at the end as a positive ending. But an initial worry for me is we measure engagement so much and we analyze engagement so much, and we probably do less engaging or less action. And I worry that AI will just lead more measure, analyze, but less. Actually, I don't think it improved. I think we're measuring engagement more now than we were 10 years ago, and I don't think there's much evidence to say that it's improved anything. Just going to put it out there.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Sam. And I think the danger is the more we lean towards digital, the more everything needs to be measurable, so that the digital software, whatever it might be, can predict. That's what it's about. It's about predicting where is that data heading. And I think when we try to do that with engagement, as much as it's quite ironic that we're this is a TED Talks forum and that's what we're doing, it's a way of measuring engagement. But one of the first things I'll be open to admit to teams is that your TED report is really just giving you a snapshot, and it's not saying, if you get lots of reds in your TED report, it's not saying you're a bad team, it's not saying you're doing everything wrong. And sometimes you can be doing the best engagement work in the world, and sometimes your results will still go down because of things outside your context. But what we try to encourage with TED is, the data is useful, it gives you an insight, but it's the conversations and the human connections that make the difference. The data has a place because it can help you talk about the right things, but it can't give you the answers. It's for the people to decide, what's right for us, what does make us engaged, and be open to the idea that it's not as simple as a X plus Y equals Z sort of equation. There's no sort of switch that we can flick that makes engagement happen. It's about thinking what's right for us right now in this context, and be open to the idea that we'll have to shift that and be dynamic as things change, situations change, and our contexts change. I'm
just going to say, because we talk about what is TED, it's about having conversations. It's like you said, the diagnostic is helpful, but having the conversations. And one of the things in the latest enhanced course that I ran while you were on holiday was, we can't make assumptions. Don't sit there right now telling me what you're going to do with your team, because I've got a great example where a team manager said, oh yeah, well, I need to do this. And actually, when she was in the facilitation session, she thought that everyone had said they needed more resource and that they needed more staff. And it was nothing to do with staffing. Actually, they all were like, no, staffing, yeah, it's never perfect, but we're talking about we haven't got enough bandages and the computers aren't working. And if she'd have made that assumption and just not explored that question and hadn't just got a bit curious about why that was a low scoring question and just made the assumption, oh, they're just moaning about staffing numbers again, actually she wouldn't have realized that all they needed is more bandages and that the computer that they were working on wasn't working well and they needed access to a different system. So I just think that for me it's about the conversations. Sorry, carry on.
No, you're absolutely right there, Sam, and yeah, I think that sort of underpins everything we try to encourage with TED. Rachel, you've got your hand up. Would you like to go in?
Yeah, I think in terms of kind of what it looks like in the future is very much based on kind of the direction of travel of how particularly like central NHS functions kind of utilize and talk about AI. So I personally very much think that it's, as someone who understands a little bit about how to use it, particularly things like Copilot, etc., that it's kind of my responsibility to then teach other people, how can this actually support you in your job role, do a better job, whether that is reducing the time you're spending on things or actually just making you a better communicator. Because I think there's a lot of good space in which AI can support us. And I think just for very light examples, in terms of TED, I was really pleased to see there's AI prompts, because I think that really helps leaders get that starting point. If they're very time poor, they can start by putting it through that. That gives them a base to kind of work on, which is great. So they don't have to kind of struggle through. They've got a bit of that time back, and then they can review the results going from that as a base. But also, just to give the example of, leadership, if on your TED report, something comes back and you talk to the team and it turns out that they're really struggling because you are emailing them and the emails are not, the best written, for example, and people are feeling a bit overwhelmed by them because you are, not coming across as a very warm person. You're just coming across with ask. As we often know, this very often happens from senior leads. There's a lot of pressure put on via email, for example. How can we teach those people that this isn't the end of the world? We can help you. You can put a prompt into Copilot. I want to send this to my team, but I know it's not warm enough. How can I kind of make this messaging a little bit clearer, a little bit better for my team? So really simple things like that can actually probably change the way we communicate with each other and engage our staff going forward. And I think that could be a real positive. I just think that one of the issues we have in the NHS is that we will kind of take away staff or take away time, but we won't teach people how to use the new tools we have effectively. So we have Copilot, we've had absolutely no training on it. So people in our roles, we have a bit more flexibility and we are able to go and find that information, try things out. We've got time to do that. So how do we kind of pass on the things that are helpful in AI to our clinical staff who A, might be scared to try and use it, or B, just don't have the time? So it's kind of picking out some of these things in terms of what can support us with staff engagement and teaching people how to do that. Because I think it's easy to be scared of it. It's easy to think that it can't help in these circles, because a lot of it is about that face-to-face communication. But AI can help us with that a lot. And I know it's not ideal, but that's the world we're working in. So it would be great to see, I guess, more tools around AI that can support with, TED and other things outside of that. So I think it's kind of dependent on the moves we make now in terms of whether it's going to help or kind of hinder us. Because what we don't want is everyone talking one AI to another AI, but what we can do is amend the things we're saying so that it lands in a softer, more appropriate way with different people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, love that, Rachel. And yeah, I think you rightly sort of highlight there's an awful lot of benefits that can be gained from AI and digital technologies, providing we use them in the right way. And that we don't take the information that AI gives us as read. It's there to input into our decision-making process, but it shouldn't necessarily be making the decisions for us, because there might be more context to a situation which the computer doesn't have. There's more to what sits underneath a TED report than just what that report tells you, and that's why we encourage those conversations. But I absolutely agree with you that part of the sort of key to getting this right is about education of how to use AI and other things as tools to help us in the work that we do. Just wanted to pick up, Stephen, you mentioned in the chat the drive to community care will require more telemetry monitoring, which AI seems to be involved in, so staff will need to be more critical thinkers. I don't know if you want to come in, Stephen, just to expand on that a little bit. I think it's along the lines of what we've been saying.
Yeah, I mean, AI is very good at looking for patterns in complex information. And if you think we're trying to move into a virtual ward situation where people's blood pressures and things are monitored from a clinical perspective, I suppose the other thing that will probably be as part of that is how those individuals are feeling, that holistic approach to it. How AI can measure how well a patient is feeling is a different thing. But similarly, teams may also be virtual in terms of they won't be together and they'll be doing that. So TED will have to include or how you manage and connect as individuals across what might be wide geographical areas, with a virtual ward being potentially hundreds of square miles and the complications of that. So I think the communication is really important, and AI's pattern matching is okay up to a point, hallucinations aside. But what we've got to do is be very critical to say, I suppose it's that from clinicians, they may look at a telemetry reading or a set of observations on a patient and know that something still isn't right. It's that human element which will is important for us to be part of when it comes to those connections. And again, you pop in, I'm a community nurse by background, you pop in for one thing and there's a problem with something else, and it's those things which we'll have to try and mitigate against these remote systems, and how we pull staff together and standardize and improve the care is going to be really important. That's my
no, I completely agree there, Stephen, and I think that does segue very nicely into my next question, which a few of you have touched on there. What should TED look like going forward? Where can TED help us and our team? So I guess what I'm thinking around this is, what bits should stay the same? What is, don't fix what isn't broken sort of thing? What things do we perhaps need to evolve as teams evolve or as technology evolves? What new support might we need to give teams? And what we're saying there, what role should AI play? I'll just throw those questions out before I sort of come in on it. Any initial thoughts on how TED can help with that, I guess? Clara nods. She said, can't reply due to fainting as 2030 is 5 years away. Yeah. The years just fly past, don't they? Sam, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I was just reflecting on how useful again, just because I ran that second session while you were on leave, how useful the focus on facilitation skills was. And actually, if we're talking about how important the conversation is, perhaps our role then becomes around equipping managers around those skills to have these difficult conversations, or to have more support around facilitation and inclusion, and how do we get everybody involved in the conversation. So yeah, that was my thought about over the next 5 years.
Yeah, definitely. I think something that I've been talking to our team leaders about, part of this topic of what the future of team engagement, it's about the sort of soft skills, the things that AI can't replace. We've talked already about data analytics and understanding data. AI is going to be able to do all that for us, which, if we look at that through the positive lens, that should hopefully free up our teams and our team leaders to be able to do more of these sorts of things, like facilitated conversations around sort of listening exercises, understanding each other. So there is potential if teams are getting this right. So definitely something, where there are opportunities if we get that balance right. Rachel, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I'm going to say something which I think is probably a little bit controversial, but I think it might be something that is useful, and that is that there are some AI which now, how do I put this? They do kind of role play with difficult conversations. They help people learn to have conversations, whether kind of well-being, leadership, coaching, etc. And I think we've talked a couple of times on this call even just about opening some of those difficult conversations and how you have those, and where TED is that kind of self-service platform for leaders to make it really easy for them to be empowered to do the stuff locally, to have the resources without kind of the intervention from OD, which they might need if they have a few more problems perhaps. It might be just worth thinking about in terms of resources. How can AI play a part of that in terms of, do people want some kind of coaching resources around some of those difficult conversations, such as inclusion, such as coaching, even things like appraisals can be quite difficult for leaders. So that might be something to kind of think about and consider, because that's something that's coming out quite a lot now. And I know it's controversial because realistically you want a human to teach a human. However, if that's not possible for any reason, or to make people feel a bit more empowered and comfortable, sometimes it's nice to do that on your own, with something that will give you feedback rather than, potential judgment, as it were.
Yeah, no, great point, Rachel, and yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think yeah, there is a definite space where sometimes people feel more able to say something to AI because you can do that without fear of judgment, because there's not a person involved there. So we talk about creating a safe space. Sometimes AI can be that safe space. And I think what we've talked about is making sure that people understand the limitations of what AI can give you, and how you can use it positively to help towards those human conversations, which we'd encourage you to have and to move towards. But yeah, definitely, I think there is a space where AI and technology can help with that and maybe provide a sounding board. And I think something which I'd like us to think about with TED is, how can we create something which brings together everything we've got in our huge bank of resources in TED to help give team leaders the right next steps. We've got the things in place in TED that team leaders can use, but anywhere where AI can help team leaders find that more quickly, get something that's absolutely relevant to their needs, I think that can only be a benefit. Stephen, would you like to come in?
I'm just trying to pull together stuff from the rest of the whole session. And this is the wish list for the future thing. And I wondered that in terms of, we were being discussing around English as a second language and all those other communication things. I wonder if technology will allow, because I know there's a certain level of real-time translation available. I wonder if a future TED might have a different ability to use different languages as a structure as well, so to reduce that communication, like the diagnostics, if they were translated, for example, or translatable into different languages, it might, because I imagine it is a barrier. As somebody who's been trying Duolingo the last couple of months, I know how difficult it must be to work in healthcare with a complex language, to have different languages available and make it more inclusive, but still have that universal questions to be asked. It's those sorts of things where I think it could be very useful in the future.
Yeah, absolutely love that. I think it does remind me of something. It was quite a while ago. We had a chat about this conversation for what if people English isn't the first language, so they needed to translate TED. And although the site itself doesn't do that at the moment, what we did find is a way you can copy your URL from TED and put it into, I think it's Google Translate, and it will translate the whole web page for you, including the results page as well, so if someone wanted to use that. But yeah, absolutely agree with what you're saying there. Any ways we can try and minimize those barriers to access to TED and to team conversations can only be helpful. Rachel, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I just thought it might be a thought to kind of build on that slightly, because I thought it was a really nice point. And I think just in terms of, I guess, different cultures and how they view TED, it would be interesting to know if there had been kind of, like kind of research groups, like where you come together and look at something and look at it through the lens of the different cultures, and how that kind of works for cultures who differ from our kind of European culture. Because I think particularly where we have certain groups, I know for us particularly, we've got internationals, particularly from places like the Philippines, for example, some of our kind of Southeast Asian areas, as well as our Gurkhas too. We know very much that their culture is kind of collective, so they have a real concern or real difficulty kind of speaking up, because there's also kind of a lot tied around needs of the many rather than needs of the few. So in terms of individualized things, personal concerns, they will find them very difficult to raise, but also around leadership, because there's a different format of kind of respect in different cultures. So for some of them, they will find it incredibly difficult to speak up against a leader, no matter what is happening. So it just would be interesting to kind of have, I guess, any reflections from the variety of cultures we have to make sure that they don't have concerns around TED, or how do we kind of overcome any concerns that we have to help them work within this framework, particularly because obviously we do have kind of queries around kind of leadership, etc., that are part of that. So wouldn't want anyone to kind of feel uncomfortable. So maybe things around how we kind of talk to that with our different cultures, if we are quite diverse in our teams, which many of us kind of will be.
Yeah, I absolutely love that, Rachel. And yeah, I think again, this is one of those areas where there's a research piece around that to go and talk to these different types of staff members that we have across all our organisations to understand, how do they perceive TED, if there are perhaps cultural barriers or anything that make them apprehensive about engaging with TED, how can we understand those better? And are there things we can do with TED, whether it be a change within TED, or is it a toolkit, or is it something about the comms and the way team leaders present it to them? Is there anything that can help them sort of embrace what we're encouraging with TED? So yeah, I love that. Really great point. Okay, fab. So I am conscious that we are almost up for time. So as always, just wanted to say a huge thank you. I'll share our you can scan the QR code if you want for feedback, but I'll share that in the chat. We do appreciate your feedback. It's topics like this which have come up from your own feedback. Let us know what topics would be useful for us to explore in the future, and we'll continue trying to create these conversations, because I've found today extremely useful, and it's given me lots of food for thought for things that we can do that can sort of add to what we're all doing in terms of inclusive teams and thinking of equipping teams for the future. Just to sort of signpost next steps from today, as always, we'll collate everything. There's a few things we said we'd share with you, so we'll share the slides, the recording from today's session, and those other resources that we've mentioned throughout today's session. We'll explore opportunities for more ED&I related resources, because I'm sure they are there, and for future enhancements in TED that will help sort of help TED evolve as our teams and our systems evolve. I'd encourage you to check out those new resources. Hopefully they were really useful. Give us your feedback as well if you think anything else will be useful, or if you feel anything perhaps needs changing in those. So just keep us informed. And just to signpost you to our upcoming events, so our next coffee catch up is on the 23rd of June, so I think that's a couple of weeks away. Our next lunch and learn isn't too far away, so that's in July. So I'm going to do a focus on building psychological safety, so which ties in a lot with what we've been doing today. In August, I've had this idea around what do we do when a team's TED results maybe aren't matching up with their reality? So occasionally, I'm sure you'll get a team who maybe the TED results suggest everything's green, everything's going well, but actually, you know, there's things going on underneath the surface. So how do we unpack that? How can a team leader sort of acknowledge the TED results, but then still try to tap into some of the conversations that need to happen in teams? So that's my plan for August. And then September, dare I say it, we're coming up to staff survey time again. It just seems to just come round as soon as the results are out. There's another one on the horizon. But yeah, our next quarterly deep dive will be in September and just before the next staff survey window. So as is tradition, I guess, we always do a bit of a focus on what we're doing for staff survey, and you know, please do come along and share what you're doing in your organisations as well. So thank you all so much for your time. We're just about on time, so well planned there. And it's been lovely to see you all. Enjoy the rest of your week, and until we see you next time, take care, and hopefully enjoy the summer as the weather improves. Thanks a lot, everyone. See you again soon.